Hey everybody, so welcome back to Jim Bob's Garden. I told you so. I knew it. I told you. Well, anyway, I'm just saying. So here we are. We have just come off of about 3 weeks or so, I think since like the latter part of January, of 80-degree temperatures. And if you look around, well, I'll show you here in a little bit, but everything's bolting. All my cold weather crops are bolting, you know, which is okay. They'll produce seeds, but that means a lot of them aren't going to continue to produce leaves for greens for salads. All right, which that kind of sucks. It also means that the lettuce is going to start getting bitter, and so on. So that's been a challenge. And I'm like, man, what am I going to do? You know, I needed to maybe put some shade up or something to keep them cool. But you know, you got 80-degree temperatures. You got 80-degree temperatures. I mean, it's been like mid-80s. And now here we are, even though, you know, we've had this long snap of nice warm weather, it's getting cold again. Matter of fact, what they're talking about tonight is possible frost. All right, most of Jacksonville and everything west of Jacksonville and north is looking at a frost warning. So what does that mean? That means if you have put in some of your not so cold weather crops, like, you know, tomatoes, peppers, things of that nature, any of that cold or warm weather stuff that doesn't do well in a frost, or actually anything below 40 degrees, then you're looking at problems. All right, you could actually lose some of your crops. So that's why I try to tell everybody to wait. Just wait. All right, you really can't trust it until, you know, between now, which is, I think today is the 18th, all the way up until about the middle of, well, the beginning of March-ish. All right, our projected last frost was somewhere between the 15th of February to the 1st of March. And usually, once you get into the 1st of March, we're fine here in the Jacksonville area. It should start warming up and stay above freezing at a minimum, and you probably won't get frost from that point forward. But now there are some concerns. So now, if you've got plants in the ground, despite my advice, which, you know, hey, my advice is just that, it's advice, freely taken, or freely given, and freely ignored. I mean, you don't have to listen to me. I'm just some guy with a YouTube channel. But if you have not taken that advice, you got plants in the ground, you can do one of two things. You can either dig them up, put them back in a pot, which is painful, and it's a lot of work, and the other issue is that, you know, it's going to take a lot of time, and if you're working, like most of you probably are right now, because it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:30, you're not going to have a lot of time between the time you get home and the time that that you lose the sun and it gets dark. So the better option is probably to cover things. So I want to go through and I kind of show you how to go about covering. All right. So let's take a break here and let me show you what I'm going to do, or how I can go about covering, even though I'm not going to cover, because all the things that I have in the ground right now are cold weather crops. All right, hang on. All right, so what we're looking to do is keep the frost off of the plants. Now you can see this is some of my tatsoi, which is bolting because of the warm weather that we've been having, and now of course it's fixing to freeze on me. So if I wanted to cover this though, which again I don't really need to, because everything I've got in here is cold weather crops, and which will take a frost. All right, but let's just say, for example, this was tomatoes, or if this was peppers, eggplants, okra, just any sort of warm weather crop, then we're going to want to cover it. Now what's the goal of covering? The idea of covering it is, one, you want to try and keep cold winds from blowing inside of it. But primarily we're trying to keep the frost off. And frost is basically the action of the dew point being met, and so you start to get moisture that gets onto the leaves of the plants, and because it's out in the air up high, then it basically turns into frost. And we don't want that frost to touch our leaves. So we can take a cover like this old sheet I've got, okay? Now we can take it and just toss it over and cover like that. But the problem with that is that if you can do that, but depending on how cold it gets, now you have a cold cloth and a little bit of dampness from the dew, and basically you're going to put this basically frozen cloth on top of your plants. What ends up happening is basically the moisture inside the plants begins to freeze and crystallize, and that causes basically a disruption in the cell walls of the plant, and that's what causes it to die off from the frost. So we're trying to prevent that. So the better way of doing it is to prop it up somehow. So you can use a lot of different things, like whatever you got laying around, like tomato cages, for example, are a great solution. You can take the tomato cage, push it down as far as you can get it, and use that with an old sheet, a blanket, or what have you, and then just toss that over the top of your tomato cage like so and cover. Or let's say that you don't have tomato cages, and you can use any old stick. Now this can be a stick from trees that you've chopped down, or like this here is a broken piece of lumber that I had. A piece of lumber that I had for a trellis, and it was just laying here. You can pound that into the ground, or you can take like an old piece of PVC, stick that into the ground. And then you can take your old blanket or old sheet, anything of that nature, pull that over. And of course, the more wind you have, the more of a challenge it'll be to get this going on. All right. So let's say we just wanted to cover this area here in particular. And voila, you now have frost protection for this amount of plants. So, now one of the things that, if you're going below freezing, is a little different than a frost. If you're going below freezing, you really want to try and trap the warmth. So it's very important to try and tuck these in so that any warmth that emanates up from the ground gets trapped inside of this. But really all we're trying to do here is keep the frost from touching the leaves. And then if you got clothespins or such, you can take that and close it off on the ends, or chip clips work. The old clips that used to hold papers together, paper clips and so on, to close that off. Now the bigger the area, of course, the more you're going to need when it comes to old blankets or sheets. You can buy frost cloth at all the hardware stores, but you can also buy sheets for next to nothing at like Dollar Tree and so on, various other places, Walmart, for reasonably cheap. Or you can use old ones. Like this is an old sheet set that we had worn out, and so we kept it around just for this purpose. Airplane. And of course, the more surface area you're trying to cover, the more sheets or blankets you're going to need to cover up. Keep in mind, you're not really trying to keep them warm, you're just trying to keep the frost off. But that's why you want to keep this cover up off of the plants, so that basically that frost does not get onto the plants themselves and freeze up. Okay? So, what are some of the other concerns you might have? So here in Jacksonville, it really varies when it comes to frost and freezing, depending upon where you're at in the Jacksonville area. Believe it or not, just in this one city, there's a huge change, well not a huge, but a substantial change in climate from one section of the city to the other. I'm out here, we're like 11 miles from the ocean. which, you know, doesn't seem like far, but believe it or not, if you're right on the ocean, like my daughter's house is 1.5 miles from the ocean, she won't freeze. She won't even get frost. But we're 11 miles, so that puts us at that borderline right between where it's going to frost and it's not going to frost. So we might get some frost, but probably not a lot. All right. And again, like I said, I don't have anything out here right now that is intolerant of frost. It's going to be damaged by a frost. So that really isn't as big a concern for me. But wherever you are, depending upon your location, anywhere in the Northeast Florida area, the further west you are, the more likely for a frost, unless you're close to the ocean, in which case you probably won't get a frost. It's just so variable here. And then of course, microclimates matter a lot. You know, do you have coverage from trees and so on that can take the frost but will keep it from hitting your plants and so on. It's really all about knowing your particular area. If you're not sure, then cover. All right, it doesn't take a long time. You saw I did this in a matter of a few minutes. And of course, if you need a larger area, then you might consider doing, you know, more as far as getting more sheets or things to prop it up with. You can even, like, I can use my little fence row back here and use that to kind of cover. If I had plants in the ground and I was concerned about it, I would have planted them closer to that fence, my little, you know, fence area around the outside of the garden. That's primarily there to keep the geese out, because they like to eat my plants, especially the newborn geese, man. They just tear my stuff up. So I could use that if I put them, you know, closer to. So I mean, there is a bit of planning as well on where you plant stuff. Other than that, there are a few other strategies. You can take plastic pots. Give me 1 second. All right, some other things you can do is, if you have smaller plants like these carrots, which won't be bothered by the frost, but if I was trying to cover up these carrots or this kale right here, for example, you can take a plastic pot and put the plastic pot over the top, and then put an old t-shirt or a pillowcase or something like that over it. If you don't have holes in the bottom, like this bucket does not, you can use buckets as well. Just place the bucket over the top. Anything that's going to keep, you know, what little bit of warm air there is in and keep the frost out will work. Okay. You can also do individual plants with a tomato cage and then just cover the tomato cage. All right. Any sort of cloth in this particular situation where we just have a frost coming and not a freeze will do. Now these buckets with covers over them like a t-shirt will work just fine even in a freeze, if you have a freeze coming. All right, these are all strategies to covering up your plants. The key is to have some sort of cover like this that does not touch the plant as much as possible. And then, you know, like I said, this is plastic, so it's going to get cold, so you may want to cover it with a t-shirt or a pillowcase. All right, so that's what I got for today. This is why it's important to know what your projected last frost date is. Same thing with your, you know, projected first frost. You need to know this information so that you can plan around what you're going to do in case of. Also, a bit of prior planning. If you have some old sheets, keep some old sheets around just for covering up plants that you might have planted a little bit too soon, because it's been known to happen where we'll even get a frost all the way into March, you know, which kind of sucks, but that's just part of the deal here in Northeast Florida. The other thing is to wait. You know, I know it's hard to be patient. Like I have some tomato plants that are probably 3-4 inches tall. Yeah, probably closer to 4, that are really getting close to where I want to get them into the ground so that they can really start to explode out and expand and get bigger and really, you know, get the roots down into the ground. But I know that if I do this too soon, then I may have a problem. All right, I'm going to cover also trees. Let's talk about some of the fruit trees. All right, now let's talk about fruit trees. Now, your fruit trees are also very sensitive. Well, not quite as sensitive, but they are sensitive nonetheless to a freeze. Now that's a freeze where actually the fruit can freeze, basically. So if you look at your blossoms, let me take one of these. Let's see, which one should I take? Take that one right Okay, now this is my understanding. I am not the expert on this by any means. But if you look down inside here and you strip this back, you'll see the beginnings of your fruit right there. Okay, that's once all the fluff has been removed, and you'll see that little nubbin right there, and that's your baby fruit. Okay, it's waiting for something to come along and pollinate it, which I've had pollinators all over these trees here recently. That is what you're worried about freezing. So if you have open blossoms like this, and you actually have a freeze coming, not just a frost, but a freeze, then it would probably behoove you to try and cover the tree. But if you look at this tree behind me, I don't even know how I would begin to cover it. So that's a huge challenge there. You can cover parts of it perhaps, or you can try and put some sort of heat source underneath it to try and keep it warm, but that's a lot more difficult if there's any sort of breeze at all, because any heat device is probably just, the heat's going to just get blown away by any sort of breeze. I know that this peach tree has done this before and has survived just fine, so I'm not too worried about it. Same thing with my peaches and my plums, which are all right now blooming out. It's really beautiful. I mean, I got blooms all over the place. I'll do a walk around here in the next week or two, probably into February, beginning of March, to kind of show you where everything's doing, or how everything's doing. But I mean, this thing is just loaded with blooms, and the idea that I would lose them all because of a freeze would suck. I mean, I really like peaches, and I would be very disappointed if I lost all my peaches. However, right now where I am at in my particular area, the projected temperature is between 38 and 42, so that's not freezing. Might get a little bit of frost, but you can see that these petals protect that little kernel on the inside that I just showed you, the little nubbin of a fruit that hasn't developed yet. And so that will take up the frost and protect most of, if not all of, these blooms from being destroyed by slight frost. Alright, so that's what I got today. I told you so. It's gonna freeze, man. You really want to be careful. Don't get suckered in, was the video I talked about. Not planting your plants out yet, despite the fact that, you know, the weather had turned nice and, you know, we got 80s. I mean, right now it's already down into the low 50s. And tonight it's going to get, like I said, between 38 and 42, somewhere in that neighborhood. We should be okay, but this is why you want to wait. This is why you don't want to go out and buy a bunch of plants, get them tossed in the ground, get going, even though you think you got that warm weather coming, because you just never know here in Northeast Florida. Alright, thanks for stopping by. Do me a favor, give me a like and subscribe, and let me know what you think. Most importantly, grow something. Get some fruit growing in your backyard. Food, vegetables, whatever you like to eat. Get it growing in your backyard, and then you can save a lot of money and have a really nice resource to go get fresh fruits and vegetables all year long. Alright, thanks for stopping by. Y'all come back and see me, and like I said, grow something.